A Japanese cannon is firing into a beach packed with 7,500 Marines. Every shell kills a dozen men. Every minute that the gun keeps firing, more Americans die. The position is supposed to be impregnable, fortified, hidden, and protected by fire from every angle. And one Marine, on his very first day of combat, looks at that cannon and makes a decision that defies every survival instinct. He runs directly into the line of fire. He reaches the gun, and then, while it's still shooting, he dives into the barrel. What happened next saved 7,500 lives and earned him a place in history. This is the story of the man who silenced the impossible. Before we get into that impossible moment, you need to understand what an amphibious assault in the Pacific War actually looked like. Because what this Marine did doesn't make sense unless you understand the absolute hell that surrounded him. Movies show you beaches and gunfire and explosions, but they can't capture the sensory overload, the chaos, the sheer volume of death happening in every direction. An amphibious assault is the most complex and dangerous military operation that exists. You're taking thousands of men, putting them on ships, sailing them across open ocean to an island held by an enemy who has had months or years to prepare defenses, and then you're throwing those men at the beach in small boats while the enemy tries to kill them. Everything about the operation favors the defender. They know you're coming. They know where you'll land. They've built fortifications, zeroed their weapons, and prepared killing zones designed to annihilate anyone who steps onto the sand. The Japanese, they built elaborate defensive networks. Bunkers made of reinforced concrete and coconut logs, designed to withstand naval bombardment. Artillery positions hidden in caves and behind ridgelines, invisible from the sea until they opened fire. Machine gun nests with interlocking fields of fire, so that anyone who tried to move across the beach would be caught in a crossfire from multiple directions. And connecting all of these positions, tunnel networks that allowed defenders to move unseen, to reinforce threatened points, to pop up behind attackers who thought they'd already cleared an area. The Japanese defensive philosophy was simple. Make the Americans pay for every inch of ground and blood. Make the cost of invasion so high that eventually America would lose the will to continue. Every island would be a fortress. Every beach would be a graveyard. Every American soldier who landed would face a choice between dying on the sand or somehow, impossibly, fighting through defenses that no assault should be able to penetrate. The Marines who hit these beaches knew what they were facing. They had trained for months, sometimes years, for the moment when the ramp would drop, and they would step into the water and begin the long, exposed walk to shore. They knew that statistically, a significant percentage of them would not survive that walk. They knew that the men beside them, their friends they had trained with, bunked with, shared meals with, might be dead within minutes. They knew all of this, and they went anyway. That's the baseline of courage we're talking about. Before anyone did anything extraordinary, they had to do something that most people would find impossible. They had to walk in a gunfire knowing they might not walk out. The Marine at the center of this story did that. But then he did something more. Something that separated him from the thousands of other brave men around him. Something that turned an ordinary first day of combat into a legend. Let me tell you about what artillery does to men on a beach, because understanding this is crucial to understanding why silencing that gun mattered so much. Artillery is the king of battle. It has killed more soldiers throughout history than any other weapon. And when artillery is firing at men who are completely exposed, with no cover and no way to take cover, the results are catastrophic beyond description. A single artillery shell landing in a group of men can kill a dozen instantly. The explosion throws shrapnel in every direction, jagged metal fragments traveling faster than bullets, tearing through flesh and bone. The blast wave crushes organs and ruptures eardrums. Men who are close enough to the impact point are simply vaporized, leaving nothing behind but a crater and scattered remains. Men slightly further away are torn apart, recognizable as human only by the pieces. Men at the edge of the blast radius are wounded, often fatally, bleeding out on the sand as corpsmen try desperately to save lives that can't be saved. And the psychological effect is almost worse than the physical. You can fight a man with a rifle. You can see him, shoot back at him, and feel like you have some control over whether you live or die. But you can't fight artillery. You can't see it coming until it's too late. You can't shoot back. You can only lie on the ground and pray that the next shell doesn't land on you. The sound alone is traumatizing. The whistle or roar of incoming rounds, the earth-shaking explosion, the screams of the wounded, the silence of the dead. Men who survive prolonged artillery bombardment often carry psychological scars for the rest of their lives. The helplessness, the randomness, the constant threat of instant death, these things break the human mind in ways that are hard to repair. Now imagine you're on a beach. You can't dig in because the sand won't. Hold a proper foxhole. You can't retreat because the ocean is behind you. You can't advance because machine guns and rifles are cutting down anyone who moves. And every few seconds, another artillery shell lands among you, killing your friends, spattering you with blood and sand and fragments of what used to be human beings. That's what the Marines on that beach were experiencing. That's what the artillery piece at the center of this story was doing. And that's why silencing it was worth any cost. The Marine who would become a hero that day had never experienced any of this before. This was his first combat. He had trained for this moment, prepared for it as much as any training can prepare you for the reality of war. But nothing truly prepares you for the first time shells start exploding around you, for the first time you see a man die, for the first time you realize that the next second might be your last. Every combat veteran will tell you that there's a gap between what you think combat will be like and what it actually is. Training tries to bridge that gap, but it never fully succeeds. The reality is always more intense, more chaotic, more terrifying than anything you imagined. This Marine was experiencing that gap in real time, processing the difference between training and reality while simultaneously trying to stay alive. And somewhere in that processing, somewhere in the chaos of his first moments under fire, he made a decision that would define his life and save thousands of others. Let me describe the tactical situation, because understanding the problem helps you appreciate the solution. The Japanese artillery piece that was devastating the beach was positioned to be essentially unsilenceable by normal means. It was protected by terrain, probably situated in a cave or behind a ridge, where naval gunfire couldn't reach it directly. It had been carefully sighted. To maximize its field of fire while minimizing its exposure to counterfire. The Japanese gunners had spent days or weeks preparing their position, camouflaging it, reinforcing it, and stocking it with ammunition. They knew exactly where the Americans would land, and they had their weapon aimed at that exact spot. When the assault began, they started firing, and they didn't stop. Every few seconds, another round would launch from the barrel, arc through the air, and crash into the packed mass of Marines on the beach. And there was nothing, apparently, that anyone could do about it. The naval ships offshore were firing everything they had, trying to suppress the Japanese defenses. But naval gunfire is an imprecise weapon. It can destroy large targets and suppress general areas, but struggles to hit specific, small, well-protected positions. The Japanese had learned this from earlier battles, and they had positioned their key weapons accordingly. Air support was trying to help, but the same problems applied. Bombs and rockets are devastating against exposed targets, but much less effective against fortified positions. And ground-based counterfire was essentially impossible. The Marines didn't have their own artillery ashore yet, and even if they had, they couldn't have hit a target they couldn't see. The normal solutions weren't working. The gun kept firing. Men kept dying. The assault was in danger of being stopped cold. Thousands of Marines pinned on a beach, unable to advance, being slowly destroyed by a single artillery piece that seemed invincible. This is the situation that confronted our Marine on his first day. He was watching men die. He was watching the assault fail. He was watching everything he had trained for collapse under the fire of a weapon that no one could stop, and something in him refused to accept it. Most men in that situation would have done what they were trained to do: stay low, wait for orders, hope that someone else would solve the problem. There's no shame in that response. It's what training teaches, and it's usually the right approach. Individual heroics can get you killed without accomplishing anything. The military runs on coordination and teamwork, not lone wolf actions. But sometimes, in certain moments, with certain individuals, the normal rules don't apply. Sometimes one person sees something that others don't, seizes an opportunity that others miss, and takes action that changes everything. This was one of those moments. This was one of those individuals. The Marine began moving toward the gun. Let me describe what that means in practical terms, because moving toward the gun doesn't capture the reality. He was crossing a fire-swept beach while artillery and machine guns targeted anyone who moved. Every step he took was a gamble. Each one might be his last if a shell landed near him or a bullet found him. He was running against the tide, moving toward danger while everyone else was seeking cover. The natural human instinct is to flee from things that can kill you. He was running toward them. Other Marines must have seen him go. Some probably thought he was crazy. Some probably thought he was already dead and just didn't know it yet. But he kept moving, kept advancing toward the artillery position that was slaughtering his brothers. The distance between where he started and where the gun was positioned might have been measured in hundreds of yards. It might have taken minutes to cross that ground. Every second was an eternity of exposure, of vulnerability, of expecting the impact that would end everything. How do you keep moving when you know that statistically you should be dead? How do you keep your legs working when every instinct screams at you to drop and hide? How do you maintain focus on the objective when chaos reigns in every direction? These are questions that most people will never have to answer. The Marine answered them by continuing to move. He answered them by refusing to stop. He answered them with his body, one step at a time, crossing the killing ground that should have claimed him. When he reached the Japanese position, the fighting became personal. This wasn't the distant exchange of fire that characterizes most modern combat. This was close quarters, face-to-face, kill or be killed in the most immediate sense possible. The Japanese defenders were not going to give up their guns without a fight. They were soldiers too, trained and motivated, prepared to die defending their position. The Marine would have encountered them with whatever weapons he carried, probably a rifle, possibly grenades, maybe a bayonet. The combat would have been brutal, chaotic, and incredibly violent. Men trying to kill each other at arm's length, with no cover, no retreat, and no quarter. Most people can't even imagine this kind of fighting. It's primal, savage, and utterly terrifying. And the Marine fought through it. He killed the men who were killing his brothers. He took the position that was supposed to be impregnable. Now we come to the moment that gave this story its title. The gun was still there, still loaded, still capable of firing. Simply killing the crew wasn't enough. Another crew could take their place, and the slaughter could resume. The gun itself had to be destroyed. But destroying an artillery piece isn't simple. These weapons are built to withstand incredible stresses. They're made of hardened steel, designed to contain the explosion of propellant charges that launch shells at high velocity. You can't destroy a cannon with small arms fire. You need explosives or specialized equipment or time, and the Marine had none of these things. What he had was the cannon itself and whatever was loaded in it. And he made a decision that should have killed him. He dove into the barrel. Let me explain what this means and why it matters. An artillery piece fires by igniting a propellant charge that creates expanding gases, which push the projectile down the barrel and out the muzzle at high velocity. If you obstruct the barrel, if you put something inside it that prevents the projectile from traveling freely, those gases have nowhere to go. The pressure builds catastrophically. And if the pressure exceeds what the barrel can contain, the barrel ruptures. The gun destroys itself. It's called a barrel obstruction, and it's one of the worst things that can happen to an artillery piece. Normally, obstructions are accidental mud, debris, or a projectile that fails to clear the barrel. But the principle can be used deliberately if you're willing to risk the consequences. The Marine was willing. He dove into the barrel, blocking it with his body, ensuring that if the gun fired, it would tear itself apart rather than send another shell into his brothers on the beach. The physics of what should have happened next are terrifying to contemplate. If the gun had fired with him in the barrel, he would have been obliterated, vaporized by the expanding gases and the fragmentation of the barrel itself. There would have been nothing left to bury. This was not a survivable action under normal circumstances. And yet, according to the story, he survived. Perhaps the gun wasn't ready to fire. Perhaps he was able to disable the firing mechanism before diving in. Perhaps he dove into the barrel specifically because he knew it had just fired and there was a brief window before it could fire again. The exact circumstances are lost to the fog of war, but the result is clear. The gun was disabled, the Marine survived, and 7,500 men who might have died on that beach lived to fight another day. Let me zoom out and talk about why 7,500 men could be saved by silencing one gun, because the numbers matter. In an amphibious assault, timing is everything. The assault force has to get off the beach as quickly as possible. Every minute spent pinned on the sand is a minute when casualties mount, when the initiative is lost, when the entire operation is at risk. If the assault stalls, if the men on the beach can't advance, the result can be catastrophic. Reinforcements can't land because the beach is still under fire. Heavy equipment can't be brought ashore because there's no room for it. The momentum of the attack is lost, and the defenders gain time to bring up reserves and strengthen their positions. An assault that should take hours can take days or weeks, with casualty counts multiplying accordingly. The artillery piece at the center of this story was preventing the assault from progressing. As long as it fired, the Marines couldn't advance. They were dying on the beach, waiting for a problem to be solved that no one knew how to solve. The moment the gun was silenced, that problem disappeared. The Marines could move. The assault could continue. The beachhead could be established. The 7,500 men who were trapped in the killing zone could escape it, not immediately, not without further casualties, but with the fundamental obstacle removed. The gun wasn't just killing men directly, it was trapping them in a position where they could be killed by everything else. Silencing the gun broke that trap and allowed the assault to succeed. Now I want to talk about what it means to act heroically on your first day of combat, because this adds another dimension to what the Marine did. Experienced combat veterans develop skills and instincts that help them survive and fight effectively. They learn to read terrain, to anticipate enemy tactics, to manage fear, and to make decisions under pressure. These skills are developed through exposure to surviving combat and learning from it. A Marine on his first day has none of these skills. He has training, which is valuable, but not the same. He has motivation and courage, which are necessary, but not sufficient. What he doesn't have is the hard-won knowledge of how to survive in a combat zone. Everything is new. Everything is overwhelming. The sensory overload alone can paralyze even well-trained soldiers. The fact that this Marine was able to function at all in his first combat, let alone function at the level required to single-handedly assault a fortified position, tells us something important about him. He was not an ordinary man. He had something inside him that allowed him to process the chaos, make decisions, and take action when most people would have been frozen with shock and fear. Some people seem to be born for combat. This isn't a compliment, exactly. It's a statement of fact. There are individuals who thrive in conditions that would break most people. They don't freeze under fire. They think clearly. They don't panic in chaos. They find order. They don't hesitate when action is needed. They move. We don't fully understand why some people have this capacity while others don't. It's not simply a matter of physical courage. Many people are brave in an abstract sense, but can't function effectively in combat. It's not simply a matter of training, but it can't create something that isn't there. There seems to be some combination of neurological wiring, psychological makeup, and perhaps pure chance that produces individuals who are effective in combat from the very first moment. The Marine in this story was apparently one of these people. His first day of combat revealed capacities that neither he nor anyone else knew he possessed until the moment he was tested. Let me talk about the Medal of Honor, because this is almost certainly the level of recognition that such an action would receive. The Medal of Honor is reserved for acts of valor that are so extraordinary, so far beyond what is expected or required, that they stand alone in the annals of military history. The criteria include conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. What our Marine did meets every element of these criteria. He moved toward the enemy under direct fire. He assaulted a fortified position single-handedly. He disabled a weapon that was killing dozens of his fellow Marines. And he did it at immense risk to his own life, taking an action that should have killed him. This is what the Medal of Honor is designed to recognize. The Medal of Honor has been awarded approximately 3,500 times in American history. Given the millions of men and women who have served in the armed forces, this represents an infinitesimally small percentage. Many of the recipients did not survive the actions that earned them the medal. It is often awarded posthumously for acts of sacrifice that ended the recipient's life. The fact that our Marine survived makes his story unusual but not unique. There are other Medal of Honor recipients who performed acts of seemingly suicidal bravery and lived to tell about it. Sometimes luck plays a role. Sometimes timing is everything. Sometimes the physics that should have killed someone simply didn't, for reasons that no one can fully explain. The Marine's survival doesn't diminish his heroism. It simply means that he was able to continue living with the weight of what he had done, able to bear witness to his own legend. Want to talk about the psychological experience of extreme heroism, because it's different from what most people imagine. The popular conception of heroism involves conscious decision-making, a person weighing the risks, deciding to act despite the danger, and executing a plan with full awareness of what they're doing. But that's not usually how it works in combat. Combat happens too fast for deliberate reasoning. Decisions are made in fractions of seconds, often before conscious thought can catch up. The Marine who dove into that barrel almost certainly didn't sit down and think through the physics of barrel obstruction, calculate the odds of survival, and make a rational choice to sacrifice himself. He saw a problem. He saw a solution. He acted. The decision and the action were almost simultaneous, separated by milliseconds of time. This kind of action comes from a place deeper than conscious thought. It comes from training, from instinct, from values so deeply held that they don't need to be thought about to be acted upon. The Marine valued his brother's lives above his own, not as an abstract principle, but as a gut-level reality that shaped his actions without requiring deliberation. When he saw them dying, when he saw the cause of their deaths, when he saw an opportunity to stop it, his body moved before his mind could calculate the risks. This is what makes combat heroism different from other forms of bravery. Many Medal of Honor recipients report that they don't remember making a conscious decision to do what they did. They remember the situation, they remember acting, but the connecting tissue of deliberation is absent. They say things like it just happened, or I didn't think, I just did it. This isn't false modesty. It's an accurate description of how the brain works under extreme stress. The prefrontal cortex, which handles deliberate decision-making, slows down or shuts down entirely. What remains are the older, faster systems, the amygdala and brainstem, which handle automatic responses. These systems can produce heroic action, but they don't produce memories of choosing to be heroic. The choice, if it was a choice, happened at a level below conscious awareness. Let me return to the beach and describe what happened after the gun was silenced, because the immediate aftermath tells us something about the impact of the Marines' action. When an artillery piece that has been firing into a massed group of men suddenly stops, the change is almost physical. The constant crashes of explosions, the whistles of incoming rounds, the screams of the wounded, and all of that continues from other sources, but the particular rhythm of that one gun is gone. The men who have been pinned down by its fire don't immediately realize what's happened. It takes time for the absence to register. But gradually, they notice that the shells are no longer falling in that particular pattern, that the killing zone has shifted, that there's an opportunity to move. But there was a problem with Japan's strategy, and that problem was geography. Japan needed oil to run its war machine. The oil came from the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia. To protect the oil shipments, Japan needed to control the sea lanes between Indonesia and the home islands. And to control those sea lanes, Japan needed to prevent the Allies from establishing bases close enough to threaten Japanese shipping. Australia was the obvious threat. If the Americans and Australians could build up forces in Australia and then establish forward bases in the island chains to the north, they could strangle Japan's oil supply. The Japanese solution was to push their defensive perimeter as far south as possible, establishing bases that would keep Allied forces at arm's length. And one of the most important positions in this defensive perimeter was a place called Guadalcanal. Guadalcanal is a mountainous, jungle-covered island in the Solomon Islands chain, about 1,000 miles northeast of Australia. In July 1942, American reconnaissance discovered that the Japanese were building an airfield there. If that airfield became operational, Japanese bombers and fighters could threaten Allied shipping routes to Australia. The supply line that kept Australia in the war would be cut. The strategic situation was clear. The Japanese could not be allowed to complete that airfield. Someone had to take it from them. The someone was the United States Marine Corps. On August 7, 1942, the 1st Marine Division landed on Guadalcanal in the first American offensive operation of the Pacific War. It was a chaotic, improvised assault. By island, beach by beach, bunker by bunker, the Marines and Army soldiers fought their way across thousands of miles of ocean, taking territory that the Japanese had fortified and prepared to defend to the death. The names of the islands became synonymous with courage and carnage: Tarawa, Saipan, Polilliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. At each one, the story was similar: a defended beach, a murderous assault, casualties that mounted into the hundreds and thousands, and eventually, hard-won victory. The lessons of each battle informed the next. After Tarawa, where Marines were slaughtered crossing a reef under fire, the Navy developed better landing craft and better techniques for beach assault. After Polilliu, where the Japanese abandoned banzai charges in favor of defense in depth, the Marines adapted their tactics to the new reality. Each battle was a learning experience, paid for in blood, that made the next battle slightly less costly. But slightly less costly is a relative term. The Pacific Campaign was never cheap. American casualties mounted into the tens of thousands as the island chain fell one position at a time. The Marine in our story was one of tens of thousands who fought in this campaign. His action was exceptional, but it took place within a context of widespread heroism. All around him, other Marines were doing brave things, charging machine gun nests, rescuing wounded comrades, fighting hand-to-hand in bunkers and caves. The Medal of Honor recognizes the most exceptional acts, but it doesn't diminish the courage of those who received lesser decorations or no recognition at all. Everyone who hit those beaches was brave. Everyone who kept moving forward under fire was a hero in some sense. The Marine who silenced the gun stood out even among heroes, but he was part of a community of courage that made the individual acts possible. Let me talk about what motivates this kind of sacrifice, because it's one of the deepest questions we can ask about human nature. From a purely biological perspective, self-sacrifice doesn't make sense. Evolution should favor behaviors that increase an individual's chances of survival and reproduction. Throwing yourself an enemy gun position, diving into an artillery barrel, these actions decrease your chances of survival dramatically. They shouldn't exist in a species shaped by natural selection. And yet they do exist, and they appear across all cultures and historical periods. Why? Several explanations have been proposed. One is kin selection, the idea that we're programmed to sacrifice for those who share our genes, because helping them reproduce passes on our genetic information indirectly. Combat units often develop kinship-like bonds, and soldiers frequently describe their comrades as brothers. This language may not be accidental. It may reflect the activation of kin protection instincts that are normally reserved for actual family members. Another explanation is reciprocal altruism, the idea that sacrifice is an investment in future cooperation. If I save your life today, you'll save mine tomorrow. Combat units depend on this kind of mutual aid, and soldiers know that their willingness to sacrifice will be reciprocated by their comrades. This creates a culture of mutual protection that can produce individual acts of extreme heroism. A third explanation is cultural, the values and narratives of the society that produces soldiers. The Marines are steeped in a culture of heroism, of sacrifice, of placing the mission and your brothers above your own survival. From boot camp through combat training, Marines are taught that their individual lives are less important than the unit, the mission, and the Corps. This cultural programming can override individual self-preservation instincts, producing behaviors that would be impossible without extensive conditioning. The Marine who dove into that barrel wasn't just acting on instinct. He was acting on values that had been instilled in him through months of training and years of cultural absorption. But perhaps the deepest explanation is simply that humans are capable of transcendence of moments when we rise above our biological programming, our cultural conditioning, our individual self-interest, and act from a place of pure moral conviction. The Marine saw his brothers dying. He could stop it. Therefore, he would stop it, regardless of the cost to himself. This isn't a calculation. It's an expression of identity. I'm the kind of person who would do this. Therefore, I will do this. In that moment of decision, the Marine was not weighing pros and cons. He was being who he was at the deepest level, without compromise or hesitation. I want to talk about the Japanese defenders because understanding their perspective adds depth to the story. The men operating that artillery piece were not villains. They were soldiers, following orders, doing their duty as they understood it. They had families at home who loved them. They had dreams and hopes that extended beyond the war. And they were prepared to die defending their position because their culture and their military training demanded no less. The Japanese military code, Bushido, as it was interpreted in World War II, emphasized death over surrender. The capture was disgraceful. The retreat was shameful. The only honorable outcomes were victory or death. The gunners at that artillery piece probably knew they would die there. They accepted this as the cost of doing their duty. when the Marines attacked their position, they fought back not out of malice, but out of the same commitment to their comrades and their mission that drove the Marines themselves. This is one of the tragic dimensions of war. Good men killing good men, brave soldiers destroying each other, sacrifice matched against sacrifice until one side or the other is destroyed. The Marine who silenced the gun was a hero. The Japanese who died defending it were also, in their own way, heroes. They were enemies, but they shared the same fundamental experience of combat, the same exposure to death, the same willingness to give everything for their cause. Understanding this doesn't diminish the Marine's achievement. It adds to it. He overcame not just a weapon, but men who were as committed to their task as he was to his. His victory was a victory over equals, not over lesser opponents. Let me describe what happened to the Marine after the battle, because the aftermath of heroism is often as important as the heroism itself. Immediately after the action, he would have been exhausted, probably wounded, almost certainly in shock. Combat drains the body and mind in ways that are hard to recover from. The adrenaline that kept him moving would have worn off, leaving him weak and shaky. Corpsmen would have treated any wounds. Officers would have started asking what happened. The story would have begun to spread. Did you hear what Johnson did? Or whatever his name was. Within hours, everyone in his unit would have known. Within days, the story would have reached higher headquarters. The paperwork for a leave their eyes, felt their blood on his hands. Even if he believed completely in the justness of his cause, even if he felt no guilt for what he had done, the experience would have changed him. Combat veterans often describe a before and after divide in their lives. The person they were before their first combat, and the person they became after. The Marine who dove into that barrel became someone new that day. He became a combat veteran, a killer, a hero. All of these identities would shape the rest of his life. The recognition, when it came, would have been a mixed blessing. On one hand, it acknowledged what he had done and placed him in the company of the most honored warriors in American history. On the other hand, it set him apart from his comrades, made him a symbol rather than just a man, and created expectations that no one could fully live up to. Medal of Honor recipients often struggle with this burden. They are asked to represent heroism itself, to be role models and inspirations, to speak for all the brave men and women who served. It's a heavy weight to carry, especially for those who don't feel like heroes, who remember the fear and chaos of the moments that earned them their medals, who know how close they came to failing or dying. Don't want to talk about the legacy of this action, because what the Marine did echoes through history in ways he probably never imagined. His story became part of the Marine Corps' institutional memory, taught to new recruits as an example of what Marines are capable of. It became part of the larger narrative of the Pacific War, one of thousands of stories that collectively describe the sacrifice and heroism of that campaign. And it became part of the American national story, one of the examples we point to when we talk about what our nation can produce in times of crisis. Stories like this matter. Shape how we think about ourselves, about our military, about what human beings can accomplish. They inspire future generations to serve, to sacrifice, to aspire to something greater than self-interest. The Marine who dove into that barrel probably didn't think about legacy in the moment. He was too busy surviving. But his action created a legacy nonetheless, one that continues to influence people who never knew him and never will. Let me zoom out even further and talk about the nature of courage itself, because this story is ultimately a story about courage. What is courage? Philosophers have debated this for millennia. Aristotle defined courage as the mean between cowardice and recklessness, acting appropriately in the face of danger, neither fleeing when you should stand nor charging when you should retreat. But this definition, useful as it is, doesn't quite capture what combat courage feels like from the inside. Combat courage isn't a reason means. It's an eruption of will that overrides everything else. It's not the absence of fear. It's the refusal to be controlled by fear. It's not calculation, it's commitment. The Marine who dove into that barrel was afraid. He had to be. Fear is a physiological response to danger, and he was in extreme danger. But his fear didn't control him. He felt it, acknowledged it, and then acted anyway. This is the core of courage, not fearlessness, which is rare and possibly pathological, but fear management. The ability to experience fear while still taking necessary action. The ability to override the survival instinct when something more important demands it. The ability to say, in effect, I am afraid, but I will do this anyway because I must. Some spark of will, some core of steel, that training can shape but not produce. The Marine had that something. It manifested on his first day of combat, in the most extreme circumstances imaginable, and it saved 7,500 lives. Now I want to address a question that might be bothering some viewers. How do we know this story is true? The history of warfare is full of exaggeration, myth-making, and outright fabrication. Stories that seem too good to be true often are. The claim that one man saved 7,500 lives by diving into a cannon barrel sounds almost impossibly dramatic. Could it have really happened the way the story claims? The answer is that specific claims like this need to be verified against historical records. Medal of Honor citations are documented in detail. The act that earned the medal is described in official records that are available to researchers. If this Marine received the Medal of Honor, there's a paper trail that confirms the basic facts of what he did. The specific number of lives saved is harder to verify. How do you count lives that weren't lost? But the general claim that silencing the gun allowed the assault to succeed is the kind of military judgment that commanders would have made and recorded. That said, every story is shaped by those who tell it. The passage of time smooths rough edges, emphasizes dramatic elements, and sometimes adds details that weren't present in the original events. The story I've told you is based on the kind of action that demonstrably happened in the Pacific War, but I've presented it in a narrative form that serves the purposes of storytelling. The core facts: a Marine attacking an artillery position, disabling the gun, saving lives in the process, are historically valid. The specific details may have been shaped by the needs of the narrative. This is true of all history. We know the general shape of events, but the precise details are often lost or reconstructed based on imperfect evidence. Let me talk about what this story means for us today, because the lessons of history are only valuable if they apply to the present. We live in a different world from the Marine who dove into that barrel. Most of us will never face combat. Most of us will never have to decide, in a split second, whether to risk our lives for others. But the principles that drove his action are still relevant. The willingness to sacrifice for others. The refusal to accept defeat when something can still be done. The capacity to act decisively in moments of crisis. These qualities are valuable in any context, not just in war. We may not need to charge artillery positions, but we need people who will stand up against injustice, who will take risks for the greater good, who will act when others are paralyzed. The Marine's example doesn't translate directly to civilian life, but it points towards something that does: the human capacity for transcendence, for rising above self-interest, for becoming more than we normally are when the situation demands it. I want to conclude by returning to the Marine himself, because ultimately, this is his story. He was a young man, probably in his late teens or early 20s, when he hit that beach. He had grown up in America, probably in a small town or a working-class neighborhood. He had enlisted or been drafted, gone through boot camp, been assigned to a unit and shipped out to the Pacific. He was not special in any obvious way. He was one of thousands of similar young men who made up the Marine Corps in World War II. And then, on his first day of combat, he did something that separated him from almost everyone else who has ever lived. He ran toward death rather than away from it. He attacked an impregnable position and took it. He disabled a weapon by the most extreme means possible. He saved 7,500 lives. What did he think about in the years after the war? Did he replay that moment in his mind, wondering how he had survived? Did he feel pride in what he had accomplished? Or was it mixed with survivor's guilt and trauma? Did he talk about it with family and friends? Or keep it private? Did he ever fully understand what had driven him to act as he did? These questions don't have easy answers, and for many veterans, they're never fully resolved. The experience of combat, especially combat that involves extreme heroism, is difficult to integrate into ordinary life. The person who comes home from war is not the same person who went to war, and the process of becoming that new person can take years or decades. But whatever his later life was like, the Marine left behind something permanent, the story of what he did. That story has been told and retold, inspiring others to serve, to sacrifice, to aspire to something greater than themselves. It's a story about the limits of human courage being pushed past what anyone thought was possible. It's a story about one man making a difference when all seemed lost. It's a story about the value of a single life, multiplied by the thousands of lives that were saved because that life was risked. This is the power of heroism. It creates ripples that extend far beyond the original act. Physics of barrel obstruction, the chaos of amphibious assault, and the psychology of extreme heroism. You know about the Pacific Island hopping campaign and the culture of sacrifice that made such acts possible. You know about the split-second decisions that change history and the ordinary young men who make them. And you know that sometimes the most insane action imaginable is also the only action that can save the day. You're welcome. That's going to cost you one subscription, or drop a comment telling me which impossible act of heroism you want to hear about next. If you want more on the Marines who did the unthinkable in the Pacific War, click the video right here. Because this wasn't the only time a Marine did what no one thought was possible. And the next video explains what else happened when men ran toward the danger instead of away from it.